Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Just a housekeeping reminder, please turn your cell phones off. And I just am so thankful to be in this space with so many neighbors and friends and some strangers, but all people who care about this really important topic. And I appreciate all of you being here today with an open heart and mind. This is a pretty incredible cross-section of people. We have 3 Nakba survivors here. We have 1 million neighbors from all different walks of life and religions and backgrounds and countries of origin and all of those things. And so I'm just really happy and proud that we were able to pull this together in our little community on the south side of Atlanta. This is beyond my wildest dreams. I honestly thought maybe 10 people would come, which is like, as a Palestinian, which is a win. Historically, would have been a win. And so to have over 125 people raise their hand and to have a wait list for this event is just amazing. So thank you. I suspect many of you are here today because you are horrified by the vicious and gruesome attacks that Hamas perpetrated on Israeli civilians and foreign nationals on October 7th. 1,139 civilians were murdered, 38 of them were children, and 8,730 civilians were injured. I suspect and hope many of you are also here because you are horrified by the catastrophic loss of Palestinian life that has followed October 7th. More than 35,400 people have been murdered, more than 73,000 people have been injured, and more than 14,600 children have been murdered. Ahead of this conversation, I've been trying to think about how, as a moderator, I can leave the parts of me that are wounded by what's happening in Palestine behind. How I can safely tuck away my own sorrow and heartbreak as a Palestinian and my helplessness as I see people who share my blood dying in horrific and tragic ways. I've lost 6 family members in Palestine over the last 150 days. I've asked myself how I can show up in an unbiased way, but the truth is I cannot separate my identity from my work in bringing you all here today. Perhaps this makes me an imperfect host and moderator, but I have really tried hard to bring you all amazing speakers who have dedicated their lives to social justice across many causes, and particularly with Palestine and Israel. I'm thankful to both of you for being here today and sharing your Sunday with us. And I'm really proud to be honoring my own ancestors through this conversation. I care deeply about the Palestinian cause because of what my father, who many of you know, and my grandparents endured. My father was just a child when the Nakba happened in 1948. He left his home on foot and was put in one refugee camp after another. My grandmother died from lack of medical care under 30 years old in a refugee camp in Palestine, surrounded by her 4 young children. My grandfather was arrested by the Israeli forces in 1948 for trying to defend his land and put in jail and separated from his family. The entire trajectory of my family was changed in the Nakba, which was such a catastrophic event for Palestinians. And what we're seeing now is that people are literally trying to erase the Nakba from our history books. The trauma is in our genes, it's in my family dynamic, it's in our dark sense of humor, and it's part of who I am. I've been really heartbroken since October 7th, and outside of my own family, it's been the Jewish community in Serenbe who has brought me comfort. I think it's important to talk about our shared experiences before we begin here, because the Holocaust was really not that long ago. It was 83 years ago. And the first Nakba in Palestine was pretty close following, 75 years ago. And the reason this topic, Palestine and Israel, is so emotionally charged for both Palestinians and Jews worldwide is it's been such recent history that we've both experienced horrific, catastrophic trauma, loss of life, vitriol directed at us, loss of culture, religious oppression, loss of homeland, exile, and the constant fear that we are in danger simply because of who we are. And I think it's why my Jewish friends can relate to how I'm feeling in this moment almost better than anyone else. I'm so thankful to be in community with all of you today, but especially the Jewish members of the community who are here, and the Jewish neighbors who, in spite of our differences and views on Palestine, have chosen to focus on our shared humanity and support my family during the last several months. I care deeply about each of you, and my desire and the shared desire of our panelists today is for Palestinians and Jews to be safe. I've said it before, but I feel it's important to say it again today. Anti-Semitism has no place in the fight for Palestinian freedom and justice. We cannot be free unless we are all free together. And I know in my heart, the liberation of Jews and Palestinians is intertwined. So some housekeeping before we begin. I want to thank a lot of people who helped make this happen. I'm going to try to keep it short, but I want to thank Ann and Tom Michaud for your time and treasure, because this was not a free event. Thank you very much for your contribution. Eric for being our audio specialist. Samir, my brother-in-law, who printed everything you'll see in front of you today. And my parents for providing Arabic cookies, because Arabs and Jews also share this. Nobody leaves with an empty stomach. We're recording this event so we can share it with folks who could not fit in this room or couldn't make it, but none of you will be recorded. We are just recording the panelists. This is a moderated panel of about 50 minutes followed by a Q&A, so please save your questions for the end. We will not scratch the surface today, but we will try in the time that we have together. And before we dive in with our guests, I've got questions for you guys. I just wanted to lay some groundwork and details on what's been happening over the last 150 years so we can all kind of come at this with some context on why we're here today and why this has been on the news so much. On October 7th, Hamas killed 1,139 people, of which 767 were non-military civilians in Israel. This included a newborn baby and a 94-year-old grandmother. The loss of life was horrific. 8,700 people were injured on October 7th, and 250 hostages were taken at the time. And currently 134 hostages are being held by Hamas in Gaza, including 2 children. Since October 7th, in retaliation for the Hamas attack on Israel, more than 35,400 civilians have been killed in Palestine. More than 14,600 children have died. More than 73,000 people are injured. 364 medical staff and doctors have been killed. 165 people who work for the United Nations have been killed. 20 people, 16 of them, have died from starvation, and that number is going up, sadly, exponentially day by day. 37 mothers are killed every day, 2 every hour. 17,000 Palestinian children are unaccompanied, which means both of their parents have been killed or they have been separated from their parents. 432 schools and shelters have been attacked. 186 ambulances have been shot at or bombed. And over 1,000 places of worship for Muslims and Christians have been harmed or destroyed. 80% of households in Gaza lack access to safe drinking water. We've seen 3 aid trucks and convoys be attacked, including the flower massacre that you guys can Google that happened on February 29th. The United States has dropped aid containing just 38,000 meals on a population of more than close to 2 million people who are one step away from famine. 38,000 meals. The U.S. has also quietly approved and delivered more than 100 military sales to Israel since October 7th. That includes 35,000 bombs and munitions, 57,000 artillery shells, and 200 killer drones. Again, that doesn't even scratch the surface of what the U.S. has provided. And we've seen President Biden offer unwavering support, both financially and in the form of our tax dollars, and politically for the continued ethnic cleansing of Palestine. I share this as it's hard to discuss the current situation and plausible genocide we're looking at without context about what this has cost the people of Israel and Palestine. Now, I'm going to give you quick, abridged bios. You all have bios in your packet for our amazing panelists today. Reverend Dr. Fahed Abu-Akel is founder and executive director of the Atlanta Ministry with International Students, Peachtree Presbyterian Church in Atlanta. He was born in Galilee, Palestine, of Christian Palestinian parents, ordained minister of the Presbyterian Church in 1978, and has led mission trips to Kenya, Haiti, Brazil, Egypt, Israel, and Palestine. He has served the Presbyterian Church in numerous executive capacities, including as member of the Peacemaking Committee and the Presbytery of Greater Atlanta. He's former vice chair of the Advocacy Committee for Racial Ethnic Concerns and a past board member of the Christian Council of Interfaith Coalition of Metro Atlanta. The National Conference of Christians and Jews honored him with the Clergy of the Year Award, the Arab American Community with its Georgia Award, and the Greater Atlanta Presbytery with the Peacemaking Award. So he hasn't been busy since 1978. Dr. Ilise Benshushan Cohen. Dr. Cohen is a scholar activist on Israel and Palestine, specifically focused on Mizrahi, those are Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. She taught Jewish studies at Agnes Scott, global issues of justice at Mercer, international policy and perspectives, and sociocultural concepts at Smith's College, and social movements at Cal State University. She's active on Middle East human rights, peace building, and education, and has led many delegations to the Middle East. She's committed to critical thinking, organizing, and educating for justice in the Middle East, and also to anti-racist activism. She's the founder of Jews of Color, Sephardi and Mizrahi Caucus, co-founder and co-leader of the Jewish Voice for Peace Atlanta chapter, and member of the newly formed International Jewish Collective for Justice in Palestine. Dr. Cohen also teaches Hebrew and mentors young Jews and allies. Also, casually, not busy. So, thank you both for being here. I'm going to dive in with some questions. Reverend, I would love to hear more about your personal story as a child born in Palestine to somebody who currently holds both Israeli and U.S. citizenship.
I want to say first special thanks to Stephanie for the first time I met her at the Columbia Seminary when a Lutheran pastor was speaking there, midway right, who wrote about 25 books. But the latest book, I hope that you can read it. It says we need to decolonize Palestine, land, people, and the Bible, because the Bible recently has been used against the Palestinians. So it's a great honor to be in your community. I grew up, the picture here is very important. So let's look at the full map. Later on, using the Q&A, we can ask a lot of questions. But the first map, basically, everything is green will be Palestinian land and people. And the United Nations said, hey, we have two people way back in 1905. We did not have 5% of the first map belong to Jews or population. So the second map, after the immigration of the Jewish people from Europe and other places, did 20s, 30s, or 40s. The United Nations said at the second map, look, we need to divide the place. One to be Jewish and one to be Palestinian. So basically, the white deal become supposed to be Israel, and the other one supposed to be Palestine. Look at how large is Gaza, and where I grew up in the green, that is not there. So during 48, 49, I grew up in the third map. So I grew up 25 miles northwest of Nazareth in the Galilee area. And my parents are Palestinian, Arab, and Christians. And my mother took me to worship in the Orthodox Church. And the Orthodox Church is 800 years old, and it's the third building. So I think the first building will be 800 years after Jesus, 1,000 years after Jesus, but the third building that I went to worship in, 800 years old, is 4 times the age of the American Constitution. So basically, my mother, as a Palestinian Arab Christian, is the one that really nurtured our life spiritually and in our society. My dad was a farmer. He wanted to work day and night. So my mother basically was the shaker of movement. She was the treasurer. She did all the decisions. So I think my mother, with other Palestinian, Christian, and Muslim women, will change your mind as women in the United States. And there's no way for a Palestinian to survive for 75 years under a brutal occupation without women. So I want to, in memory of my mother, I want to salute all the women, the sisters, and so forth. So the only thing I remember about the first Nakba, the word Nakba, is an Arabic word, and it means catastrophe. and you would see how it means. So the first thing that I remember about being a 4-year-old kid, going with my father, 5 sisters, and 2 brothers, leaving our home. So as a 4-year-old kid, your heart yearns to your mother. So I still remember every time I see the children of Gaza, see myself right now like on a television screen running around Dad, 5 sisters, and 2 brothers. And she was not there. And suddenly I looked, and she was on the top of the roof. You know, the Palestinian roofs are flat. To say to an American, your mother is on the top of the roof, it doesn't make sense. So we left her, and we did not go north toward Lebanon. We went east to the mountain to a Druze village. We were building a makeshift refugee camp, but it's not a camp, it's like scouts tent, just basic. And my older sister told me, you know, I was restless and running until I was on after. But after we came back, we discovered 5 Palestinian villages next to my village were destroyed. That means, in your mind, say, when Israel became a state, in that third map in the line, Israel destroyed the new state, 530 villages and towns, and exiled by force between 750 to 1 million Palestinians out, who became Palestinian refugees. And when you don't have cars, what do? You walk. So the people in Galilee, lower Galilee, will go toward Lebanon. The people around the Sea of Galilee will go toward Syria. The middle of Palestine will go toward the West Bank and Jordan. And anytime you hear the word Gaza, 75% of the people in Gaza are refugees from 65 villages. So that means right now in our writings, we are calling what is happening to Gaza a second Nakba. Because we see right now everything in the Middle Eastern television. American television is bankrupt. You don't see 1 minute. But when you see Palestinian and other television, they know, there is no sifting. They show you everything raw. So you see the suffering of the people there, and I wish Americans can see the suffering to see what is happening to the Palestinians. So as I think about my life, in the white map, 750 to 1 million Palestinians became refugees, and they are still refugees. Now, my folks, who stayed and became citizens of the state of Israel, number 155,000. And so my first grade language would be, of course, Arabic. In the 4th grade, I started studying Hebrew. And in the 6th grade, I started studying English. And I could not graduate from high school without passing Arabic, Hebrew, and English. So anytime I talk to the young people in America, I always say, if you want to be good patriotic and a good American, look at the other languages. Languages is power. And we need to do that. In the eyes of the state of Israel, the new state of Israel, I'm an occupied person. I'm a citizen of the new state, but I'm occupied. So they immediately created 65 laws how to control water. So from 1948 until I came to the US, 1966, I could not leave my village, listen to that, without going to the Israeli military governor and get a permit. If I'm found Fi'aka or Haifa without that permit, I go to court, and if I don't have money, I go to jail. That was my condition. So as a person living in the new state of Israel, but in the eyes of the government, I'm occupied and they need to control my life. And as I think about that experience, I always think about basically when I came to the United States of America. I arrived here January the 29th, 1966. I went to Lakeland, Florida, and I went to college. And the first Thanksgiving in my life, this fellow wanted to take me to Detroit, Michigan. Imagine, after 8 months, my brain still living in Galilee. So the day before, I think, I'm supposed to go to the military governor. He said, what do you mean? I'm still living there. Huh? He said, I said, I need a permit. He said, you know, this is America, you can go anywhere. I said, you mean anywhere? He said, yeah. So as I think about my experience, when we left Florida, he said, this is Georgia. When we left Georgia, he says, this is Tennessee. For you who are born here, it doesn't mean anything to you. But for a person who couldn't go 5 miles, that was the most lovely experience in my life. The first Thanksgiving in my life. So as I think about that, I'll speak later on something else. Basically, every military clutches that Israel control our lives in the state of Israel in 1967 was lifted up, and they put all their energy how to control the people in Gaza and the West Bank. So right now, I need for you to think you're a 56-year-old woman, a 56-year-old man in Bethlehem, 7 miles from Jerusalem. And you cannot go to Jerusalem without a permit. You cannot go to the hospital without the permit. You cannot go to the university without a permit. You cannot go to your field without a permit. I'm trying to tell you, we do not know the situation on the ground. And I want you to start learning more about it.
That's so helpful. Ilise, I'm going to jump over to you. I think your personal story and background and your commitment to human and civil rights and your drive to do restorative justice work in Palestine has come at great personal cost to you. You were raised in a Sephardic Jewish household. You lived in Israel, in a Palestinian city. You completed your doctoral research on state violence and racism towards Mizrahi Jews in Israel. You've got pretty vast and deep knowledge, scholarly knowledge. How did you end up an advocate for Palestine?
Not what my Jewish community thought would happen to me. So I also just want to say thank you so much. It's incredible to be in a room full of people that care about what's going on. And I'll probably cry multiple times. I'm going to start with a story that I'll come back to your question, I promise. But a few months ago, when this first started, after the Hamas attacks, which were devastating, just because many people were murdered at one time, regardless of their backgrounds, it was a horrible incident. Shortly after, watching what the Israeli government was doing in Gaza was really overwhelming. And so I wrote something to my synagogue listserv, and I said, I'm having two simultaneous thoughts. It was when South Africa was saying that they were going to take Israel to the International Court of Justice. And I said, I'm having two feelings at one time. One is that moment of oh my God, I cannot believe Israel is being taken to International Court of Justice for genocide. That's a moment. And then the exact same moment, having the feeling, thank God South Africa is taking Israel to the International Court of Justice for genocide. And both of those feelings are living in me constantly. And as a you should be the one crying, not me. He sees me cry a lot. So my journey was, my family is from the Ottoman Empire, what is now modern-day Turkey, the Isle of Rhodes, and my father was born in Cuba. One of my grandfathers was a rabbi and was brought to Cuba as the Sephardic rabbi and then brought to Atlanta because there's a Sephardic community. Sepharad in Hebrew means Spain, so it means at some point supposedly we came from the Iberian Peninsula, even though if you look at my ancestry, don't tell Spain this, has nothing to do with it, it's all Middle East. My relationship to the world is not from a European perspective, even though you'll look at me and you'll think that's what it is. And part of what I got from my family is that the Sephardic heritage is so strong because my family lived for generations and hundreds of years in multicultural and multi-faith and multi-ethnic spaces. And all my grandparents knew multiple languages. They lived amongst Greeks and Turks and Jews and Muslims and Christians. And that's what I learned and that's what I knew. And my mom said, even though we're a minority in the community, in the Jewish community, we're only about 10% of the Jewish community in the United States. And they were often seen as like the non-Jews or the ones that were not Jewish enough. So for instance, European Jews, if Ashkenazi Jews married Sephardic Jews, then that was seen as an intermarriage. And it was also seen as you marrying down. So I remember stories that my mom would tell me growing up in Atlanta about what that was like. And she said, no matter what, you have to hang on to the Sephardic identity. In addition to that, my family who lived in the Isle of Rhodes, the last 9 months of World War II, because they had moved from what is now modern-day Turkey to what was now under Italy, they had taken on Italian citizenship. And all the Jews who had Italian citizenship that lived in Rhodes were deported the last 9 months of the war to Auschwitz. And if my family had kept their Turkish citizenship, then they would not have been slaughtered. And so I think it is a very deep part of me that says we have to live in places that are multicultural and multi-faith and multi-ethnic. Because when we have a drive to build a one place for one identity and one group, we are bound to shit on a bunch of other people, excuse my language. And that means that more and more people are going to be harassed because you have to pit other people against one another in order for a group to dominate. So that's a little bit about like how I already understood myself. Now, I also went to a Jewish day school, and it was in a primarily Ashkenazi Orthodox community in Atlanta, and I was always taught that Israel was my home. From the moment I can remember, even though the orientation of my family was Turkey and the Isle of Rhodes. It was very clear in my community. Those are our places that we're a diaspora from, but I was still trained to think that Israel was my home. I'd never been there. And so when I was 17, I begged my mom if I could go on this experience to high school in Israel. And I got a scholarship and I arrived and I kissed the tarmac and I was I was like, oh my God, I've arrived. What I started to learn while I was there was we were told, it was right before the first Intifada began, for the first Palestinian uprising against Israeli occupation. And we were told by our teachers, don't go into the Arab quarter, don't go into the Muslim quarter, don't go into certain parts of Jerusalem, it's dangerous. And we were like, what are you talking about? Like, who are the Arabs? Literally, those were the questions we were asking. And all our teachers fell silent. And I was not a question asker. I really got scared. I hated asking questions in class. It made me very nervous. How many of you do that? How many of you are afraid to ask questions? Seriously? Wow. Okay. Well, I will never ask that question in a crowd again. Anyway, I was afraid to talk. Maybe it's being the last of 4 kids. And I could feel that sense, the silence. Now, any of you who know Jewish people is when you ask a Jewish person a question, there's often several opinions. And so the fact that my teachers would not speak about what was going on and they wouldn't answer the question about who the Arabs were was one of those moments that I could feel in my body something was very, very wrong. And I couldn't tell what it was because nobody would explain it to me. And so I got back home after 2 months and the first Intifada began and I still couldn't make sense of anything. And then for university, I was planning to go, was focused on Latin America, was focused on learning about US intervention in Latin America, I was studying Spanish, and my university said, I'm sorry, Colombia is too dangerous, you have to pick another place to go. So I was like, where am I going to go where I know the language? Because I don't want to go somewhere where we speak English. Thank you, Fahed, for saying we need to know other languages. So I decided to go to Israel. And 3 days after arriving in Israel, Iraq invaded Kuwait, and Iraq was talking about sending Scud missiles to Israel. And all of a sudden, I found myself in a university system where Palestinians who were living right by me, who were going to school with me, were not getting the gas masks and all the utensils to be able to, in case there was a biological or chemical warfare, but we were getting them as American Jews. And we were being told that we were going to be safe, but our Palestinian counterparts were not getting those same things. So that was one level. This was also during the first Intifada. I also took a class at Hebrew University. The irony is that I had to go to Hebrew University to learn all of this. But my professor was a human rights professor, Daphne Golan, and she taught a class on international law and human rights. And the focus or the case study was the Israeli occupation in the West Bank and Gaza. And all of a sudden, I started to understand. I was like, oh, that's what they were not answering in my years in high school. They were not telling me that Israel occupies another people. They were not explaining what the occupation looked like in the West Bank and Gaza. And so why there was an intifada started to make sense, because people were under occupation. So this was also one of the people who started B'Tselem, which is the Israeli human rights organization. And so they were having conversations at the time. So all of a sudden I found myself involved in that community. Well, right before the Gulf War started, I left my university closed shop and said, it's too dangerous for you to be there. You need to come home. And so I came home, but I struggled with this idea of what am I supposed to do with my Jewish identity, this relationship to Israel, understanding the occupation, or a little bit about it. And so when I graduated from university, I said, screw this, I'm just gonna find a way. I'm sorry if I keep using language, that's a little more, okay. And I bought a one-way ticket and I decided, that's it. I'm gonna do Tikkun Olam. I'm gonna be part of repairing the world. I'm gonna participate in peace and justice. I'm gonna go to Israel and figure out what my role is. And I lived for a year in a Palestinian city, Taibe, sandwiched between Qalqilia and Tulkarm. What I only found out later is this city, this city of Taibe was actually handed over by Jordan, another three cities, handed over by Jordan in exchange to make sure that this whole area of Palestinians that were part of a revolt in the 1930s would be cut off from each other. So it's still happening. So I'm living in the city where that's, how to depoliticize Palestinians who are Israeli citizens. And while I was living there, I was doing interactions between Jews and Palestinians. And in that time, I saw the Palestinian cities got 10% of the budget that Jewish cities got. I saw that all the trash from the Jewish cities were being brought to mountains of trash right by the Palestinian cities. And every kid I met had some kind of respiratory infection and there was no hospital there. I also saw that when I brought together Jewish families or Jewish students and Palestinian students, we had to spend three sessions with Jewish parents saying, we just want to bring your kids to a Palestinian city inside Israel. We just want them to experience what it's like going to another place and learning from other students. And just to convince them to go somewhere else in their state. It's like going to, any other area, any neighborhood you want to say, if white people are going to a black neighborhood or a Latinx neighborhood. It was literally trying to convince them. And when I went to the schools, I saw how the schools were underfunded. So as a Sephardic Jew, what I was also seeing is that Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews from Middle Eastern descent, were treated as second-class Jewish citizens. So not only was I seeing how Palestinians were being treated, I was also seeing how Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews were being treated. And to me, it was just a hierarchy, and it gave me a deeper understanding of what was happening in the US. And it also gave me understanding that even though I was told that Israel was my home, that even my group of people was not free. And so it transformed everything. And when I got back to the States and I wanted to talk to my Jewish community saying, I'm sure if people knew, if they just knew what was going on, of course they would want to change it. I mean, wouldn't you want to change it? And all they wanted to do, a lot of the community wanted to do was to silence me and to silence people like me. And they did that multiple times. So I'll stop there for now, but yeah.
I think
just for like base level understanding, it would be helpful for each of you to talk about, you touched on it a little bit, Elise, so I'll start with you, Bob. Like, what does it mean to be an occupied person? Let's say not even Palestinians who live in Israel, but Palestinians who are still in what the meaning of Palestine being occupied in Gaza or the West Bank. But can you talk more about what is life like and, you know, how did they get there?
Basically, immediately after 1967, all of the Israeli clutches lifted from the Palestinian people of Israel to the West Bank, in Jerusalem and Gaza. An occupation means they want to control your life. First of all, movement, second, education, and third, labor and business, every part of your life. The Palestinians in the West Bank and in Jerusalem are less oppressed than the people in Gaza. Gaza under the Israeli control was terrible. Okay? And when the Israeli left Gaza, basically from the time of the election until now, Gaza, a small place, less than the DCAP country, is controlled by air, land, and sea. Okay? Now, the people in the West Bank, the way you control them, you will have a checkpoint outside every village and town. In the checkpoint, you will have several soldiers, so you cannot get out to work unless you have a permit. So, the Palestinian will have a car, and the license is green. I am from Galilee, my license is yellow, like every other Jew. So when it's green, they know where you're coming from. And not only that, if I am a soldier, I can know if you are coming from Ramallah, from Jenin, from Nadi, from the first letter. And also for a Palestinian, even citizen of the state of Israel, when I look at your ID, from the first letter, I know you are not a Jew, even though I speak better than a Jewish person in people. So there is a certain way to control your life. So I would say the occupation of the people in the West Bank, when it comes down all the way to movement, you're going to come to Tel Aviv airport. If we're going to go out, you need to go down to Jericho, and from Jericho, they can put you over there, and then the following day you go to Amman and then so forth. So basically, the occupation have one goal. That goal, I want you to get frustrated and get out. So, and I think about look at your map. I would say I need for you some of you to think about the second page of that map. I would say that Zionism is a settler colonial ideology. What is the difference between colonial and a settler colonial? Colonial, I go to India, suck the resources, and get out after 150 years. Settler colonialism is the US, Canada, and Australia. My basic goal is to finish the Native Americans, and we did. So, settler colonialism ideology has nothing to do with Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. If I want the land without the people, I want the land and the resources. And the beautiful example will be North Georgia with the Cherokee Nation. The Cherokee Nation said to the people in Decatur, I love Jesus, they build a church. I love education, they build a school. I love justice, and they build what? A courthouse. But when the governor of the state of Georgia wanted the gold rush and wanted North Georgia, I say goodbye to Jesus, the church, education, and we send him to Oklahoma. To me, you can't understand what is happening in Gaza today without us understanding that ideology. So, settler colonialism won the land without the people. And today, when you go to the ideology of Zionism, and I need you to challenge on that, to me, it's a right now, when you come to the situation, we in the Galilee area, imagine 155,000 people. And now there are 2 million Palestinian citizens of the state of Israel. I'm saying the word Palestinian citizens of the state of Israel because before I left, I was not allowed to be called Palestinian. Language is very powerful. You are Arabs of Israel. You swim with the Arab people, huh? And so in Galilee, in Mutalla, we have 2 million. In Gaza, we have 2 million people. In the West Bank in Jerusalem, we have 2.8 million. Forget about 7 million Palestinians who are refugees outside Palestine and Israel. Between the river and the sea, for the first time in Israel history, we have 7 million Israeli Jews and 7 million Palestinian Arabs. If you are a settler colonial with a Zionist ideology, you can't understand the behavior of Israel in Gaza without understanding that ideology as of today. So to me, we need to find a way how we can help people to live together. Answering your question, the animal in the room or the big problem in the room is occupation. Occupation to have single kid. I control you. I can be a 20-year-old kid from Atlanta or Miami and so forth. When I put the gun next to your head, I want to feel in your life. So occupation is brutal. And right now, when all of our eyes on Gaza, both settlers and basically the soldiers are attacking the people in the West Bank. So occupation is hell for the occupied people, but I think it's also hell for the people who occupy them, because how do you live at night?
Yeah. I think it'd be good to take a step back and talk about the founding of Israel and the ties to the beginning of the Zionist movement, which actually started in the late 1800s. Ilise, do you want to try to summarize that as concisely as you can?
I like the way you added the time part and crunched it really small. Late 1800s, a European Zionist movement, which basically was to establish a homeland somewhere. That homeland ended up being a homeland in Palestine that was supported by the British. Why was it supported by the British? Well, the Zionist movement in the late 1800s, part of it was because Jewish people in different places in Europe and in Russia had experienced pogroms and violence, or felt like they weren't, even if they were assimilated in their environments in Europe, were not actually accepted fully as Jews or as full citizens. And so the Zionist movement has many, many different forms of Zionism. There's much more militaristic forms of Zionism. There's much more liberal forms. There's other ones that called, this microphone does not like me. Is this working? Awesome, I'll hold it. I was saying something about, some people also really wanted a binational state. I also just want to say, while the Zionist movement, I know you wanted this concise, while the Zionist movement was functioning to build a Jewish homeland in Palestine, and with British support, there were also Sephardic Jews that had lived in the region for hundreds of years, because that's where Sephardic Jews are from, or Mizrahi Jews. And they actually did not want a Zionist movement there, because it was talking about having a Jewish home, and again, that idea of an ethno-Jewish state. But the Zionist movement, the British accepting it, also at the same time had promised
independent state to Arabs, and also had divvied up the Middle East in the way that they wanted to break down the Ottoman Empire. So you had promises to multiple people, not just to Jewish people, and it was only a certain segment of the Jewish population that actually was part of the Zionist movement. Now, what ended up happening is many people will say that the reason why Israel was established was because of the Holocaust. And I just want to be clear that that's actually not why it was established. The tail end of it, there was a push because so many Jewish people had been killed in the Holocaust that the push for it became much bigger. But if the initial movement of that was also, the British said it, they wanted an outpost in the Middle East. And the outpost this is a perfect outpost. There had been years and years, like centuries, where there were edicts of expulsions against Jews in England and Spain and all over Europe. And this was an opportunity to both get rid of the Jewish population of Europe and also put them somewhere that would be useful to the West. And I wanted to add one other thing to that, but I can't remember.
And just, I'd like to pitch in here right now. When I arrived to Lakeland, a friend of mine took me to Jacksonville, Florida. And I heard this Baptist minister lecturing for 1 hour and a half that these Arabs and Jews have been fighting since the time of Abraham. So I went back to the library and started to do some research. I want to know why this minister is saying that. Let me declare, there is nothing in biblical history or a secular history that statement is true. Never. Amen. So the idea that the Arabs and the Jews have been fighting since the time of Abraham is bankrupt. You cannot prove it. Not in the Bible and not in secular history. So as I think about what is happening to the Palestinians, basically the Palestinians paying for the sins of the European Christians, because the Jewish people suffered in Spain, Portugal, Russia, Spain, France, England, and finally in Germany. So the one that protected the Jews in the Middle Ages were the Muslim and the Arabs. So every Arab nation capital, you always had a Jewish quarter and an Armenian quarter. So from a historical point of view, we got along very well. And the one that did not like the Jews will be the Europeans. So I, a Palestinian Christian or a Muslim, I'm paying the bills of the sin of Europe against the Jews. Because this fellow said, I said, you are a Baptist and your brother is a Baptist. If you destroy his church and take his land and send him to Alabama, you're going to like him? He said, no way. Yeah, so it has nothing to do with religion. Okay? So I just want to put that's very crucial, very important. You
want to add something?
I do.
I do, yeah.
When the Zionist movement actually moved toward establishing the State of Israel and building the institutions supported by the British and then the international world, that the Zionist movement then became much more focused on, again, the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. And I know that Fahed brought the book and always talks about it, but Ilan Pappé, who's an Israeli historian, he's going to show it to you now, wrote about Plan Dalet. Dalet is the letter in Hebrew that's like D. And it was literally about how to expel Palestinians, to get rid of as many Palestinians as possible in order to create a Jewish state that has majority Jews. The other thing I wanted to say is Montague, who is one of the people in the British Parliament, had actually, and Jewish, had actually said that he did not support the Zionist movement and the British supporting the Zionist movement of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, because that was as if it was forcing all of a sudden Jewish people to identify only with one state rather than the states that they all live in and come from, which is a deeply anti-Semitic sentiment. Lastly, Christian Zionism, which I think also is a big piece of what exists and was part of the movement behind the British supporting a Jewish homeland in Palestine, has an eschatological understanding that if all Jews move to Israel, then the second coming will happen. And if the second coming happens, the Jews might disappear and get killed, go up in the rapture. Maybe a few thousand will also be saved, but that it's actually a religious goal to make that happen. And that's a large movement to supporting Israel to continue the way it is today.
I think, so we have 10 minutes, so we've got to like really power through some things. And I'm going to challenge you guys with some history. You know, so we've jumped ahead a little bit, but I think kind of clear the decks here. Britain was controlling Palestine, and the Zionist movement had picked up steam for all the reasons that Ilise said. And then the British said, just take it, right? Like take it and be our allies there. Never mind the people that already live there, right? But what did they expect to happen? Did they say to the Jews that we're going to create Israel, like just do whatever you want with the Palestinians? Like what did they expect to happen in that moment?
Going back to what she said, we need to remember a man by the name of Herzl. He was a journalist and wrote a book, you can read it at Emory, called The State of Israel, in German, okay? The Jewish state. So basically, he wanted 3 points. One, every year to have a Zionist Congress to convince the Jews to buy his philosophy. Why? Because most of Jewish intelligentsia in Europe, from Russia to France, to England, to Germany and so forth, they said to him, go jump in the lake. I'm a Russian Jew, I'm a French Jew, I'm a German Jew, I'm a British Jew. Huh? So in the beginning, nobody voted, but the man continued going on year after year after year. And the Zionist Congress still going on from 1896 until the present, every year, okay? The second goal will be, I want to make it international issue. And with the Balfour Declaration and the British Empire being the powerful, made it international issue. The Balfour Declaration is the foreign minister letter to the Zionist Congress, 73 words, saying, I want you to go to Palestine, it's yours, but don't harm the local citizen. I think it's a lawyer that wrote that deal, you know? It's, you go there, but don't harm the local citizen. So the Balfour Declaration made it international, but listen to that. The Balfour Declaration was 1917. England had jurisdiction over Palestine 22. So you and I can give Mexico to Brazil when we don't have jurisdiction over it. That's power. Huh? The third thing, of course, will be the immigration in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s. So basically from 1922 to 1948, the British mandate over Palestine had 2 rules. The Israeli militia can build themselves and become a military, but if a Palestinian want to resist, they put him in prison and cut their head. So that was, to me, the British mandate was more of, from my perspective of a Palestinian, it was more of a cover-up to give Palestine to the Jewish people.
And the occupied territories now is technically land that is not Israel's land, but which they occupy and govern and control, right? And so how does a territory become occupied?
But the issue is, you remember, in 1948, 47, they created United Nations Resolution 191 to divide. Israel, in the map in front of you, said to the second map, go jump in the lake. Israel moved to the third map. Look at the third map. The third map is basically remaining the West Bank and Gaza is only 22% of original Palestine. So after 1948, 67, when Israel took the Sinai Peninsula with Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the West Bank, basically the United Nations injected a second resolution called 242. And that's what Jimmy Carter, our president, did, exchange land for peace. Why? From 1948 to 1967, I'm Israel.
and say to all the Arab country, recognize me. And they said, there's no way, okay? So after Israel occupied the Sinai Peninsula, Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the 242 exchanged land for peace. So the Camp David Accord is basically using the 202. So from 1967 to the present, Israel already moved 800 to 900,000 settlers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. They can go anywhere they want, and they can't work in Israel. But the Palestinians they are under military control. And military, a kid can rule you without, it's military control. There is no freedom.
Before we dive into questions, I think to bring this to present day, we should talk about how did Hamas come to power in Gaza, and how have they stayed in power for 17 years?
Do you want me to answer it?
Would you like to answer?
Basically, from 1964 to 1993, the United States did not want to recognize the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization. So in the early days of Hamas, Israel was an instrument to start an alternative organization. Okay? So the way I need to bring it to your mind, the same thing we created in Afghanistan. Who created Al-Qaeda? Good old America. We wanted to kick what? The Russian out of Afghanistan. The same one we created turned against us, right? That's the same thing with but when the moment you say Hamas, it's at least 5 branches. One, social work. The other one, medical. The other one, education. The other one, helping the people who are in prison, their families, and so forth. And the last one, the wing, is military. So when they wanted to go for election, Abbas said, please do not go for election. But Israel and the U.S. said, we need democracy. Okay. They went to election, and Brother Jimmy Carter was there witnessing everything. For the surprise, I doubt why the CIA and the Mossad said we want it. Maybe they knew the results. I don't know. I'm just doubting. So if you are in Gaza and your brother died and the one that helped your people is the social worker of Hamas, and the only thing the Palestinian Authority want to do is create a building and say, we are a state. Now, when it comes to voting, who are you going to vote? The one that helps you or the one that doesn't say hello to you? So for the surprise of Israel and the United States, Hamas won fair and square with the election. And when the results came, we did not like it. From my mind, there's no difference between Hamas and the Herut Party, for example. I lived in Israel, and the Herut Party ideology is exactly like Hamas. In fact, Begin had a map behind his head office that I want the land between the river, the Nile, all the way to the Euphrates. So you can be extreme in both sides. And I think the extreme on both sides going to take us to hell.
I just wanted to add one thing. If people want to read a little bit more about Hamas's development and also what happened from the 2006 elections and the 2007 overthrow by both Israel and U.S. support of it, there's an article called The Gaza Bombshell, and it was written by a famous journalist, which of course I can't remember his name right now, but it was in Vanity Fair of all places, and I would encourage you to read it.
Last question, and then we'll take questions from the audience. Do you think that Israel can exist as a democracy while being an ethnic, right? That is for Jewish people, by Jewish.
So I'm going to, I put a quote down in here, just, I love this analogy because I think it helps understand the context of what we've been talking about. So imagine a triangle, In one corner of the triangle, you have Jewish, one corner you have Democratic, and one corner you have the whole of Israel and Palestine. Israel, this is a quote, Israel cannot at the same time be a Jewish state, have a democratic character, and maintain control over all the territories and populations it now dominates. You can only have two of those at once. So if you have Jewish and democratic, then you can't have the whole of Israel and Palestine, because that means you would be controlling all Palestinians and still calling it Jewish and democratic, which isn't a democratic state. You could call it democratic in the whole of Israel-Palestine, but it can't be Jewish, because that would mean that if it were just Jewish, then you're oppressing the Palestinians, who are also half of the population between the river and the sea. So any way you look at it, it's, if you want a dominating Jewish state, then it's an apartheid system, which Israeli human rights organizations and Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International and South Africa, who has experienced apartheid, has said that it is an apartheid state, which means that there are two kinds of rules for the two different peoples that live there. So as Fahed has been describing, all the different laws that apply to Palestinians versus the laws that apply to Israeli Jews. And that can mean, so for instance, Palestinians, there's not a civil court for Palestinians to go to related to any kind of state violence by Israel. The only courts they are allowed to go to are military courts. And I'll tell you what happens in a military court. You go into a military court, and it's called a kangaroo court by human rights organizations. Say a 16-year-old was found writing a slogan on a wall that was anti-Israel or about ending the occupation, or maybe they threw a stone. They can be arrested, detained for 6 months at a time, detained for years, never brought to trial, but they can come up in this military court, and then they can be basically kept in prison for a long period of time, unable to see their family, unable to get out because they're already seen as an enemy of the state. That is not a democratic state. That is not providing Palestinians with an opportunity to actually be free. And those are some of the elements of the occupation that makes it absolutely impossible to have a Jewish, I mean, you can have a Jewish-dominated state. I wouldn't recommend it. I would actually recommend, and Jewish Voice for Peace and many other Jews who are upset about what's happening and have been fighting against the occupation and apartheid and the 17-year siege in Gaza and now this genocide, have all said, you know, everybody needs to have equality from the river to the sea. And there are many different forms that can take, but to end the Israeli occupation and to end apartheid and to end the siege on Gaza and allow everybody in that whole region to experience what it's like to be absolutely free.
I have two sentences. One, if I take the U.S. Constitution now and put it in the state of Israel, it will blow it to pieces. Israel will not accept the U.S. Constitution. Okay? Number one. Number two, this rabbi came to me and said, Reverend, why don't you accept a Jewish state? I said, of course I do. If you answer my question, yes. He said, what is your question? I said, do you accept in America to be a Christian state? He said, not in hell. I said, why? He said, I want to be equal. Now give me a break. You want to be equal in the US, and there I want to be your servant? It doesn't work anymore. I want to say that this writer, Ellen Pappy, is an Israeli Jewish professor, was in Haifa University, and now in England. This is the best book about the 48 Nakba that I experienced, using Israeli sources and British sources. If we are really serious, we need to do some study. I brought many copies, so I'm moving myself from a preacher to a salesman. You need, she have a lot of copies that you can, many books that you can borrow. But I think to have your own book for $20, you cannot beat it.
I want to say a couple of things too. Elaine, thank you for what you shared. And I really think it's important to acknowledge how uncomfortable many of our friends and neighbors, even those that were courageous enough to come into this room, are today. And this is a really hard conversation. And as somebody who wants, all of my Jewish friends and brothers and sisters around the world to feel safe, it's hard, even for me as a Palestinian, because there's a trade-off between, if I acknowledge what Israel is doing to Palestine in a forum like this, do I make Jews less safe around the world? Because just the knowledge of what's happening and what the Israeli government is doing could be equated to all Jews everywhere, and that's not fair and it's not right, but it could happen, and am I perpetuating that? I mean, this is messy and it's really hard. But the one thing I want to be very clear on is that that's never the intention, right? And we didn't talk about it a lot, but Zionism, the founding principle of the state of Israel, is not Judaism. And there are a lot of Jews who don't agree with what Israel is doing, as we've heard from this room. And I just want to be so clear that that's never the intention, is to just say, anybody who supports Israel is an awful person. That's not true. My goal in creating this is to share the Palestinian perspective, because you have to dig for it. And it was really scary to do this, because I'm probably the only Palestinian many of you will ever meet in your lives. There aren't many of us. And there aren't many of us that have made it out of the Middle East. And so I also don't represent every Palestinian on the planet, but it's important for me to do what I can to honor my ancestors, for you all to hear Palestinian perspectives where you can, because you cannot find it on CNN, you cannot find it on Fox News. They call the kidnapping of children arrests, and I'm like, no, they were kidnapped, and so I just think it's important to hold that space, and that was the goal for today. And I realize that it makes a lot of people uncomfortable, and you don't have to agree with everything that was shared here today. But I really sincerely thank you for coming, and I think it's really brave for everyone to come. And I just want to address one thing that you shared about the packet. So the packet was created in response to questions I received ahead of this event with what people needed to know, and there are widely varying levels of knowledge in this space, right? There are people who don't know what an occupation means. There are people who don't know what Zionism is, right? And then there are people who have read books about these topics. So it was difficult to curate information, and particularly in 90 minutes, right? Where I know we're over, but this was an attempt to answer some of the questions. The sheet that you referenced, sir, is from a website called If Americans Knew. Anybody is welcome to check it out, agree, disagree, whatever, but it has information that you cannot find in the US press that you might find on foreign press sources that are a US media machine is just not going to share with people. And so that's why that was included. I appreciate your comments, and I really do appreciate the way you delivered them, and we're not always going to agree on everything, but the thing that I'm so proud of in this neighborhood is that we can do this.
We do agree.
Yeah.
We do agree on just about everything.
Yeah.
Please. Thank you.
I'm going to close out, and then the speakers will stay for questions for a little bit if anybody wants to chat with them. But again, I just want to thank everybody. There was a guest book when you came in. Email addresses in that guest book will just be used by me. It's just a list for if we have a second conversation with these panelists, or if we have another Palestinian scholar or Middle East scholar come to town, that we might do this again. I want to be able to communicate with people that are interested. You don't have to leave your email address, but if you'd like to know what's up and also receive any follow-ups from this event, please drop your email there. And please do let me know if you want to do more of these. Eric and I have created the Nadi Olson family lending library. So there's a table. If you exit these doors on the left, you'll see a whole bunch of books Eric and I bought. They're for loaning to the community. So if anybody is interested in reading about Palestine, the history of Palestine and Israel, please grab a book. My only ask is that you return it to us when you're done, or pass it to a neighbor who can return it to us when they're done. But we hope to just be a resource for people in the neighborhood who have questions. I'm going to finish with a Rafat al-Arir poem. Ilise mentioned him. He's the poet that was targeted by... I know, they're friends. He was killed in a targeted Israeli airstrike on his home on December 6th, 23. If I must die, you must live to tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of cloth and some strings, make it white with a long tail, so that a child somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye, awaiting his dad who left in a blaze and bid no one farewell, not even to his flesh, not even to himself. Sees the kite, my kite you made, flying up above, and thinks for a moment an angel is there bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope, let it be a story. I have personally spent the last 5 months horrified. I'm scared for Palestinians. I'm terrified that we're witnessing the extinction of Palestinians and that we will be like the Native Americans before long. I'm terrified for Jews around the world who are getting lumped in with the atrocities that Israel is committing. But there are days like today where I feel a lot of hope and a lot of gratitude for being in community with all of you and for all of you taking time out of your Sunday to be here, some of you driving a long distance, and to our panelists for being here. So thank you all.
The last thing we wanted to say is we would like to speak in your church. I am a Kiwanya, in your Kiwanis Club, Rotary Club, wherever you open the door, we will come. I'm retired. I come free. She is very expensive.